There's an urgent plea to save 46 Australian children in a Syrian refugee camp. The youngest is a 1-month-old boy. 33 others are under the age of 5. Their families say it's urgent they're saved as winter hits the camp. The Herald Sun is reporting some of the children are suffering rickets, others can't speak, and some are suffering the shakes. The Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton has previously said he would not place Australian officials' lives at risk to repatriate the women and children. Joining me to discuss this is Matt Tinkler, Director of Policy and International Programs at Save the Children. Thanks very much for your time. So we've seen a little bit of media coverage about what the conditions are like. They're set to get worse in winter.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. We've gone from one extreme to the other. So back in August, it was extreme heat that these children were coping with and the risk of dehydration and that sort of thing. And now we're heading into a brutal winter. Temperatures are bordering on freezing right now. There's very limited shelter, water and sanitation conditions are very poor, so children have literally died from hypothermia, so virtually freezing to death in these camps, and we're gravely concerned that an Australian child could die if they're not removed to safety very soon.
We've had the government repatriate some orphans. They say now there's a heightened risk. Obviously it's been a pretty fluid situation with the situation with Turkey, the Kurdish forces as well. Do you accept the government is drawing a line and won't place people at risk?
Not at all. That's just a red herring, actually. It's been very clear for a number of months that repatriation is possible. The Kurdish authorities who administer the camps have offered to move these women and children to the relative stability of northern Iraq. I was in northern Iraq just a few weeks ago, and it's a very secure and stable environment there. The US government and the US military have offered to support this repatriation. All it takes is a phone call from the Australian government to the Kurdish administration, and that can happen. So this notion that an Australian life could be put at risk by rescuing these women and children just doesn't stack up on the evidence.
So talk us through that. The Kurdish forces would essentially take the children, the families presumably as well, from this camp to the border. You say from there wouldn't be any issue with Australian officials in some way then taking them away and flying them back to Australia?
That's right, and we've seen other countries do this over the last few weeks. The US, the UK, Denmark, Finland, these countries are moving to repatriate their citizens now. It's certainly possible. The logistics, the security environment are such that it's relatively easy to transfer these women and children out of the camps to the border crossings in the Kurdish region of Iraq, and from there to the relative calm and safety of a city like Erbil. They can fly from Erbil to Dubai and to Melbourne directly. So this notion that that's hard is just is not correct.
Right.
There's no barrier at all to these women and children being
one
removed.
of the barriers, though, was that the women wouldn't be taken by themselves. The children, sorry, wouldn't be taken by themselves. They need to be taken with their mothers. So would that have to happen? Is there any angle here for just the children to be taken?
Look, I don't think so. What global evidence says is that the child's best interest is almost universally served by keeping them with their mother in this sort of scenario. So what should happen is the mother and child should be removed together. If the mother has made a wrong decision, conduct themselves in a way that's inconsistent with Australia's values and our laws, they should face the full force of the law, and they should face that here in Australia, where we've got a robust security regime, robust legislation and courts to deal with this kind of offence. That doesn't, and it can't happen in northeast Syria right now. So we've got to put faith in our systems here and focus on the needs and interests of those Aussie kids. We can't let them stay in these camps much longer, or there is a serious risk that one of them will die.
You say wrong decision. I mean, we're talking about going over and joining ISIS. It's a pretty dramatic one. Would the women be willing to, if they do come to Australia, as you say, face the law and go to jail possibly? Are they aware of that? Are they happy to go through that process?
Yeah, absolutely, they all are. And some did make bad choices and did the wrong thing. Let's make that very clear. But it's more complicated than that. Some were duped or coerced. Some were children when they went and became women and parents while they were there. But all of them have said they will fully cooperate with law enforcement agencies. And more than that, they've said that they would sign up by consent to terrorism control orders. And that means every single aspect of their life can be monitored 24/7, an ankle bracelet, emails monitored, curfews, essentially home detention. So any risk that they may have posed to the Australian public is surely mitigated by those very onerous conditions that they have said we will sign up to these if it means getting our children to safety.
The situation with the Kurdish forces being able to take them out, why wouldn't the women the women make the decision, obviously, why wouldn't they just do that anyway and then see where they can get from the border?
The Kurdish authorities need a request from a sovereign government like Australia. They don't want to leave this to people's own devices. So they will act on that request. They've demonstrated that in the last few weeks with other governments, as I mentioned. All they really need is that formal request. Australia's done it before with the orphan children who were repatriated earlier this year. So it's certainly possible. You know, the insecurity we saw when the US forces pulled out of the region a few months back has stabilised. So the security environment is as good as it has been, and probably as good as it will be in that part of the world right now.
So we know what the government said publicly, Matt. What are they saying to you privately when you put forward this option?
Well, the government is saying privately similar things to what they're saying publicly, that they're concerned about the risk that might be posed to Australians in extracting people, and they're concerned about the risks that may be posed by the women if they're repatriated back home. What they haven't done, in our view, is answered well enough all those points I've just made, particularly any risk that might be posed back home being addressed by the women signing up to those control orders and also cooperating fully with law enforcement agencies. And I should say the other really important factor here is they have families that we're working closely with here in Australia that are ready to wrap the love and care and support these children and women need to reintegrate back into the Aussie way of life. That's really important, particularly for the children who have been through so much. Some of them have shrapnel wounds. They've all had significant mental health issues as a result of what they've lived through and experienced. They need their families and they need that love, and they need the support that an Australian community and Australian service providers, government and agencies can provide to allow them to resume an Australian way of life.